It's a quiet evening in Lake Tahoe. The sun dips behind the mountains, and in a small home studio, a familiar voice hums softly, still rich, still soulful. At 71, David Coverdale, one of rock's most powerful singers, sits surrounded by memories, platinum records, photographs from the road, and the ghosts of a band that once ruled the world. He smiles when he talks about the past, but there's a sadness too, the kind that only comes from knowing how something so beautiful could fall apart. "I don't know about full-time anymore," Coverdale says with a grin, "but I sang all the time as a kid, to express myself, to feel joy. It's all I ever wanted to do." That joy would carry him from the working class north of England to the world's biggest stages, and eventually to heartbreak. Because behind the glamour, the hits and the screaming crowds, Whitesnake, one of the biggest rock bands of the 1980s, was quietly collapsing from within. What really caused one of rock's most powerful voices to watch his own band unravel. This is the untold story of Whitesnake's rise, their fall, and David Coverdale's long-awaited truth. Long before the spotlight, there was simply music. David Coverdale was born in 1951 in Saltburn-by-the-Sea, a small coastal town in northeast England. His mother and aunt were both strong singers, their house constantly alive with the sound of harmonies and laughter. Music wasn't just a hobby, it was family tradition. Coverdale recalls singing along to the radio, mimicking blues and soul artists like Otis Redding, Sam Cooke, and Ray Charles, voices that taught him how to blend strength with emotion. That early love for soulful singing would define his career. And by the time the 1970s rolled around, fate came knocking, in the form of one of the world's biggest rock bands, Deep Purple. When Deep Purple split with their flamboyant frontman Ian Gillan, they needed someone who could command the stage and bring a fresh energy. They found that in a young, unknown David Coverdale, joining a legendary band overnight was both a dream and a nightmare. Coverdale entered Deep Purple during a turbulent time, egos clashed, creative visions diverged, and the band was struggling to stay cohesive. Still, he made his mark. Albums like Burn 1974 and Stormbringer 1974 showcased his soulful edge and deeper tone, pushing Purple's sound in a new direction. But the writing was on the wall. By 1976, Deep Purple imploded under internal tension and exhaustion. Coverdale was devastated, but not defeated. He later said, "I was left wondering if I even wanted to continue, but I couldn't stop singing. It's who I am." And so, from the ashes of one rock giant, another began to form. In 1978, David Coverdale launched Whitesnake, a band initially envisioned as a blues rock outfit, not a hairsprayed MTV phenomenon. The early lineup was packed with top-tier British musicians, Bernie Marsden and Mickey Moody on guitars, Neil Murray on bass, John Lord, also of Deep Purple, on keyboards, and Ian Pace on drums. They were seasoned players who shared Coverdale's love for blues, soul, and rock grit. Their early records, Trouble 1978, Love Hunter 1979, and Ready and Willing 1980, were steeped in groove and swagger. Tracks like Fool for Your Loving and Ready and Willing built a loyal European following. Whitesnake was real, raw, and musically tight, a band with heart. But America hadn't yet caught on. And in the music industry, the US was the promised land. To conquer it, Whitesnake would have to evolve. And in that transformation lay both their greatest triumph and their ultimate undoing. By the mid-1980s, the musical landscape had changed. MTV had taken over, glam metal ruled the airwaves, and looks mattered almost as much as sound. Coverdale, always ambitious, decided to adapt. He streamlined Whitesnake's image, refined their production, and aimed directly for the American market. The result was the 1987 self-titled album Whitesnake, a thunderous melodic masterpiece that exploded across the world. Fueled by immortal singles like Here I Go Again, Is This Love, and Still of the Night, the record went multi-platinum, selling over 8 million copies in the US alone. MTV was on fire with their videos. Coverdale's then-wife Tawny Keaton became a pop culture icon, dancing across the hoods of Jaguars in the Here I Go Again video, a moment that symbolized the excess, glamour and sensuality of the 1980s. Whitesnake had finally conquered America. They had it all: fame, fortune, and stadiums packed with screaming fans. But success, as Coverdale would later confess, came with a crushing weight. To the public, Whitesnake looked unstoppable, but behind the scenes, the band was unraveling. While Coverdale was the constant face and voice, nearly everyone else was replaceable. From the late 70s onward, Whitesnake became notorious for its endless lineup changes. Guitarists came and went: Bernie Marsden, Mickey Moody, Mel Galley, John Sykes, Adrian Vandenberg, Steve Vai. Drummers rotated almost yearly. What started as a band of brothers became what many insiders called a musical carousel. These shifts weren't random. Creative differences, pay disputes, and ego clashes tore the band apart from within. Some members resented Coverdale's control. Others simply couldn't handle the pressure of constant touring and fame. John Sykes, who co-wrote much of the 1987 album, was fired before it was even released, a decision that shocked fans and insiders alike. Coverdale later admitted, "I was surrounded by amazing players, but we weren't a band anymore. We were a corporation." Whitesnake had become a brand, and Coverdale was the CEO. But running a rock empire is exhausting. And soon, even he began to crack. The late 1980s were Whitesnake's golden era, but also their breaking point. Massive tours followed. Every night was an arena spectacle: fire, lasers, and screaming crowds. Yet, backstage, the mood was tense. David was struggling with severe vocal problems. His voice, once one of rock's most powerful instruments, was faltering under the strain of relentless touring. He required throat surgery, a terrifying prospect for any singer. Meanwhile, his new recruits, including the flamboyant guitar wizard Steve Vai, were pushing the band's sound further into flashy, technical territory. It was impressive, but it wasn't the same soulful, blues-based Whitesnake that Coverdale had envisioned years before. He later said, "We had lost our center. It wasn't a band. It was machinery. It was all about keeping the wheels turning." When the joy of creating vanished, the end became inevitable. By the early 1990s, the cracks had widened into canyons. Grunge was on the rise, and the glossy arena rock that had ruled the 80s was suddenly out of fashion. Bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam were redefining what rock meant, and Whitesnake's bombastic style felt like yesterday's news. Internally, morale was low. Health issues, ego battles, and the endless demands of fame drained Coverdale's spirit. Critics accused him of turning Whitesnake into a solo project wrapped in a band's name. The media shifted its focus from music to Coverdale's personal life, his marriage and eventual messy divorce from Tawny Keaton. Behind the camera flashes and magazine covers, David Coverdale was falling apart. By 1991, he'd had enough. "I had to walk away before it destroyed me completely," he confessed years later. And just like that, Whitesnake, one of the most dominant forces in rock, was gone. No dramatic explosion, no farewell tour, just a slow fade into silence. The collapse of Whitesnake in the early 90s was felt deeply by fans around the world. Arena tours stopped. MTV moved on. The faces that had defined the band scattered, some joining new projects, others fading from view. Critics called Whitesnake's downfall inevitable, a casualty of excess, ego, and changing times. But to Coverdale, it was personal. His health was fragile, his marriage was ending, and for the first time in decades, he wasn't sure who he was without the roar of a crowd. Still, the music didn't die. Classic rock radio kept Whitesnake alive, playing Here I Go Again, and Is This Love, endlessly. Fans continued to cherish the anthems of their youth, even as the band itself disappeared. The silence, however, wouldn't last forever. By the late 1990s and 2000s, something remarkable happened. Nostalgia brought Whitesnake back. Coverdale, older and wiser, decided to revive the name with a fresh lineup. He wasn't chasing fame anymore. He just wanted to reconnect with the fans who never let go. Tours across Europe, Japan, and America sold out. The energy was still there, maybe more grounded, maybe less wild, but just as heartfelt. "I do this now for the joy of it," he said. Not the pressure, not the money, just the joy. That honesty defined the later years of Whitesnake. The music industry had changed. The MTV era was gone, but Coverdale's voice, and the songs, still resonated. At 71, David Coverdale finally began to speak more openly about why Whitesnake truly fell apart. It wasn't one thing, he admitted. It was a storm of egos, expectations, exhaustion. "We stopped being a family." He spoke candidly about fame, how it elevates and destroys in equal measure. "When the joy goes," he said softly, "there's no point." And at one stage, the joy was gone. His reflections aren't bitter, they're human. He doesn't blame anyone specifically. He acknowledges that success changed everyone, himself included. And he accepts that Whitesnake, at its core, was both a dream and a cautionary tale. "Whitesnake gave me everything, and took everything," he once said, "but I wouldn't trade it. Not one bit." Looking back now, Whitesnake's story reads like a rock and roll epic, equal parts triumph and tragedy. At their peak, they embodied the 1980s arena tours that sold out in minutes, music videos that defined a generation, and songs that will echo forever. But that same excess was also their undoing. Lineup instability, relentless commercial pressure, and the weight of being at the top eventually cracked the foundation. And yet, the music remains. "Here I Go Again," once a song about loneliness and perseverance, now feels prophetic. Every lyric reflects Coverdale's own journey. A man who fell, rose again, and kept walking down that road on his own. Whitesnake's fall didn't erase their legacy. It cemented it. They became a symbol of how far passion and persistence can take you, and how fragile even the biggest dreams can be. Today, David Coverdale lives peacefully, far from the chaos of touring life. He occasionally records, sometimes performs, and always sings. His voice may be older, but it carries more soul than ever, the kind that only comes from living, losing, and learning. He no longer hides from the truth, he embraces it. It stopped being fun, and when that happens, you have to stop. But I'm proud of what we did, proud of the music, proud that people still care. Whitesnake's story, in the end, is not one of failure, but survival. A band that burned bright, fell hard, and left behind a soundtrack for millions of lives. And as David Coverdale looks back at 71, the lesson is simple. Fame fades, bands break, but the music, that joy he felt singing as a child, with his mother and aunt, that never goes away. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the story of David Coverdale and Whitesnake, check out our next video, where we explore the untold truth behind Deep Purple's breakup, and how it gave birth to two rock empires. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, because in rock history, every legend hides a lesson.
That was today's story under the silent spotlight. If you enjoyed uncovering Hollywood's forgotten past, leave a like and subscribe for more vintage tragedies, mysteries, and untold legends. Until next time, keep the reel turning.